So, Starfield's latest update is in Steam beta, and Bethesda Game Studios has given us the patch notes. Now, some people have been wondering why this update seems to be so much smaller compared to previous updates. So in today's video, I will be answering that and also telling you everything else you need to know about the update itself. So if you enjoy this video, if you find it helpful, please like, subscribe if you're new, with notifications if that is possible. But let's get into this update. So as always, Bethesda has uploaded 2 articles for the update. The first is about the top line features, and the second includes all the patch notes. So that first one is entitled AMD's FSR 3 comes to Starfield, and it starts off by saying, AMD FSR 3 comes to Starfield in our latest Steam beta. Those of you playing on Steam can opt into the beta to see the improvements brought to the game before this update becomes available to all our PC Starfield players. This new feature allows for a combination of upscaling as well as advanced frame generation, that is the big one, boosting your frame rate for better performance. While AMD's FSR 3 works for a wide range of video cards, and that includes NVIDIA cards, mind you, you will want to verify that your system supports it so that you get the best experience. It is also recommended to use FSR 3 with VSync on and with a VRR monitor for the best experience. For those participating, you can enable FSR 3 by heading to the display settings and accessing the upscaling options. From there, you'll be able to cycle through the option best suited for your experience. Now, I'm really glad, honestly, that we finally got an FSR 3 in the game. Personally, it doesn't bother me because I have an NVIDIA card, so I can use DLSS. However, I know how many AMD users are out there that can't use DLSS that have really wanted FSR 3 in the game. You've kind of been stuck with FSR 2 for a good few months there. And even though it's not necessarily bad, of course you wanted the latest version. You wanted to have all the improvements and the features that come along with FSR 3. So for that reason alone, I'm very glad that it's in the game. What I will say though is that I'm genuinely surprised that it's taken this long, right? Because Starfield is meant to be an AMD sponsored title. So I thought AMD would want FSR 3 in the game as soon as possible, either at launch, ideally, or as soon as possible after that, because they want to showcase FSR 3 to as many different people as possible, right? And when are the most people playing Starfield? It's at or around launch. It's not now. There's nowhere near the amount of players playing Starfield right now on PC versus launch time. So not many people are experiencing FSR 3 and enjoying all the features and the capabilities that it has. So that surprises me a little bit, but I don't know why it took so long. I'm just glad that it's finally in the game now. What I will say though is that the improvement really comes into it when you use frame generation. I've actually done a bit of comparison between FSR 2 and FSR 3 without frame generation, just to see if the upscaler itself had a boost to FPS, and it's very minor without frame generation. In like the most heavy resource intensive areas in the game, I always use Gagarin when it comes to that. The boost to FPS was like 1 to 2 frames per second when it comes to FSR 3 versus FSR 2. DLSS is still better, mind you, without frame generation, but it's not that much more, again, unless you're using frame generation. So please turn that on if you really want to enjoy high frame rates for Starfield, if you have an AMD card. Moving on, let's go on to the patch notes. So the patch notes are entitled Starfield Update 1.9.67 Notes, February 7, 2024 Beta. I still don't understand how Bethesda numbers their updates, like 1.9.67 and 1.9.51. I don't get it. Just number them normally. Anyways, we've added a new update to Steam Beta that includes AMD's FSR 3 options and a few other fixes. We encourage all of our Steam PC players to try it out and let us know your thoughts before this update goes live for all our players soon. Other fixes included in this update will be related to performance and stability, including adjustments done to address the Form ID issue we've seen several commenting on. I just want to pause here and say, Bethesda, it's a little more than several. There's been a lot of people commenting on the Form ID issue wanting it fixed. There's a lot of people that just can't play the game because they have the issue and they have to start a new save file and they don't want to do that. Or there's a lot of people feeling forced to go into New Game Plus so that they don't encounter the Form ID issue and kind of ruin their save files. It's been a lot of people, and I do believe this one needed to be fixed much, much sooner because of how prevalent it is. However, it's good that we're seeing some sort of improvement. But I'm going to talk about this in a second. Just notice that they don't use the word fix for Form ID. They use the word adjustment and they use the word improvement before, but not the word fix. I suspect, I hope I'm wrong on this, but I suspect that at some stage for very, heavy players that keep playing the game, I suspect Form ID might kind of crop its head again unless Bethesda continues to improve the situation. But we'll talk about that later. So, fixes and improvements when it comes to graphics. Again, they added support for AMD Fidelity FXTM Super Resolution 3 or FSR 3, and they also added support for Intel Xe Super Sampling or XeSS. So that's really good for those of you on Intel. They also fixed an issue that could make the clouds appear to vibrate when using DLSS performance mode, and they fixed a minor visual artifact that could occur when aiming with a weapon or task swapping. For stability, again, they changed how Form IDs are freed when loading saves. This should improve, not fix, improve stability for saves that have visited many locations, and literally in the next line, fixed a crash that could happen when making changes to the ship that required all items to be moved to the cargo bay in the shipbuilder menu. And finally, for miscellaneous, they reverted a change that caused the data menu to open when taking screenshots with F12, and they fixed an issue causing the resolution scale to reset to 1 when switching from full screen to windowed mode when using DLSS. Now, I'm still encountering some resetting bugs when it comes to settings. For instance, in the latest Steam beta, whenever I swap from FSR3 to DLSS, for some reason, it always resets my rendering resolution scale to 67, even though I want it at 100 and it keeps changing it to 67. I have to change it again, right? Also, sometimes it resets the dynamic resolution setting for me. I always want that thing off. I don't want dynamic resolution, but sometimes when I swap from FSR to DLSS, it turns it back on again and I need to turn it off again. So those two things, I really hope they fix. It's kind of an annoyance. Not a major issue, but kind of a little bit annoying. But anyways, let's go to the talking points. First of all, why is this update seemingly so small? Bethesda previously established that they want to release decently sized updates about every 6 weeks for Starfield. So obviously, we're a little bit earlier than that. If you look at when updates have been released previously, the previous update went into Steam beta on the 18th of January, and the full release was on the 30th of January. So if we go 6 weeks after that, it would mean a Steam beta of the 29th of January and a full release of 12th of March. Obviously, it is earlier than expected. So why is that? And why is this update seemingly much smaller than the previous update? Because the previous update had about 100 plus fixes. I think it was 120 by my count. So why is it so much smaller? Even though it still has big features and improvements, and not all fixes are equal, it is still clearly smaller than other updates. The reason being, I believe, and I think a lot of other people believe this as well, is that this is very likely an out-of-cycle patch. Bethesda has said they're not just going to stick to these big updates every 6 weeks. If something needs their attention and needs to be fixed, they will release an update even though it's technically in between that 6 weeks cadence. So that is probably what has happened here. And some people also suspect that they couldn't fit in the fixes and features in this Steam beta in the previous update because maybe they just needed a little bit longer to work on it, especially with the Form ID issue. I know how complicated, or I guess I suspect how complicated it must be. They probably just needed a little bit more time. So it had to wait a few more weeks. But do you really want to wait until potentially the end of the month or next month for the next update? No, Form ID needed to be fixed right now. If anything, it needed to be fixed months ago. So they were probably like, we should just release this now. Let's just do a separate update, try and address Form IDs as soon as possible. And then come later in February or in March, we'll have the bigger update with a bunch of other features. So that's what we suspect. That's what I suspect. So don't be worried that this update is a little bit smaller. Honestly, maybe they should have called it a hotfix and just included the Form ID thing, and then have XESS and FSR3 in the next big update. Make it seem like a bigger deal than normal, because FSR3 didn't need to happen right now. It wasn't like game breaking or anything. It could have waited for the next update to make it seem a little bit more meaty. And maybe that would have meant you could have had the Form ID issue fixed earlier if it was released as a hotfix. My speculation, I know that, and I could be wrong, but that's why we have this update so early. That's why it's smaller, so don't stress about it. Now let's talk about FSR3 versus FSR2 versus DLSS. What has been my experience? Now, I have an NVIDIA RTX 4090, so it's a very, very high-end card. It's not the best test case for a lot of you users out there, especially if you're using an AMD card. FSR obviously is going to be better on an AMD card versus an NVIDIA card, right? But that being said, I'll still talk about my experience. When it comes to testing performance and settings, I always go to Gagarin. Gagarin, for some reason, always tanks my frame rate, more so than Killer City and everywhere else in the game. I don't know why, but Gagarin just sucks for me. So when I want to test settings and see really how good these improvements are, I'll go here and try it out. So when I was trying out FSR2, again, not with frame generation, because frame generation is clearly improving your performance. I wanted to see how good the actual upscaler was and to see if there were any improvements to FPS just with the upscaler. So with FSR2, in 4K Ultra, everything maxed out, dynamic resolution off, frame gen off, as I mentioned, I was getting around 63 to 68 frames per second, right? But with FSR3, it was about 64 to 69 frames per second. So very, very slight improvement. If for whatever whatever reason you can't use frame generation, you're not going to see that much of an improvement for frames per second if you are using FSR 3 over FSR 2. You need to turn on frame generation, trust me. However, DLSS is obviously still better. If you have an NVIDIA card, you are going to be getting better FPS over FSR 2 or even FSR 3, of course. So for DLSS, using those same settings, I was getting from 68 to 73 frames per second. So FSR 2 and FSR 3 are pretty close, but DLSS is a little bit better. Also as well, DLSS still looks better. Quality-wise, DLSS is still better than FSR, and I couldn't notice that much of a difference between FSR 2 and FSR 3 when it comes to quality. They both still look about the same, and I really had to pixel peep to notice a difference. To be honest, I had to pixel peep to notice a difference between FSR and DLSS in general. There are some differences. Sometimes around objects, you can notice these little like black bands and they don't look the best, but I'm literally zoomed in on my PC trying to notice the difference in the screenshots. Honestly, through normal play, you're not going to care. You're not going to notice this stuff. So next, I do want to talk about some other people's experience when it comes to FSR 3 who are specifically using AMD cards, because that's going to give you the best example, right? So for instance, there is a user on Reddit called Zua1993, and they said the following, quote, "Okay, just installed and tested. Disclaimer, I'm AMD 6900 XT owner with 165 Hz and a 2K display." Holy fuck, they did magic. FPS from 70 insta jumped to the 165 with correct frame input latency. This is massive upgrade. Never thought I can play this game so smooth and chill. This is amazing. Well done, Bethesda. And then the user Just My Two Sentences says, I couldn't hit 60 FPS in a killer city, and they were using a 6800 XT and a 5800 X3D at 1440p for reference. So I wonder if this will finally make it possible. And in the edit, they say, definitely hit 60 in a killer city now and 110 plus with frame generation enabled. Now I just need some content or official modding support to drop before I do another playthrough. I'm going to have a bit of a discussion on that later in the video, so stick around. But yeah, for those of you actually on AMD cards using frame generation, you're going to notice much more of a benefit for sure. So if you're on an NVIDIA card, stick with DLSS. If you have AMD, try out the Steam beta, see if you like it. The one warning I'll give you, make sure not to go on the Steam beta, play around, do some save files, and then try and opt out of it again, because those save files won't work when you opt out of the Steam beta. Just a little bit of a hint for you. But now let's talk about Form IDs. I am genuinely worried that the Form ID fix they included isn't really a fix. They're very intentional. Bethesda is always very intentional with the language and the terminology and the words that they use in any of their official communications. They're a very, very careful company. I think it matters that they didn't use the word fix and they keep using the word adjust and improve, right? I suspect that though they've genuinely helped the Form ID situation, and hopefully if you've encountered it, you can now play your game, right? Though I think that it's helped, I don't know whether it's fixed the issue forever, because if it had, they would have said that, right? And I worry that if you continue to play this game, or maybe if you heavily mod it and you never go into New Game Plus and your save file just becomes huge, right? I worry some people might encounter the Form ID issue again down the road. And if that does happen, I hope that Bethesda Game Studios continues to improve the situation. And I suspect that they might. This might be the first step, and then in the next update or the update after that, we might see further improvements to Form IDs. But it needs to get to the stage where no one can ever possibly encounter Form ID issues, because it's just a bad thing. You expect, but Todd Howard has talked about it, they want people to play this game for years and years and years, and some people are going to be using the same save files, right? So because of that, you don't want people eventually to be encountering Form ID and corrupting their saves. You don't want that at all. And I just worry with the language that they've used that might actually happen in the future. But the reason why I say this, I want to highlight this comment on a previous video of mine. This is from Jetry_co, and they're a modder, and they've been talking to a lot of other modders. In fact, they were talking to other modders before Starfield was released, and they were concerned that Form ID was going to be an issue. So when I asked them about this is what he said. Quote, "It's kind of nuanced. The exact bug wasn't predicted because of its circumstances, but considering Starfield's size, we speculated the current ID format would not be able to accommodate the forms and references that sooner or later the player will hit the limit. According to the actual reports, it did hit the limit, but it's because of IDs not being reused. Either way, it's an issue with the form limit, which could have been avoided if they reworked it in the first place. Now that will take a lot of effort in the engine, so I understand if they don't. But even if they fix the reusing of deleted/unloaded references, and again considering Starfield size, there's still a non-0% chance to hit the limit naturally and get the same issue. So I think he's saying what I'm thinking as well, that they haven't actually completely reworked the engine to resolve the issue from the get-go. They've kind of delayed it a little bit, if you will. So I'm worried, all right? I'm a little bit worried. I hope it doesn't happen. But if people keep playing this game with their save files, especially if they keep modding it and just adding to the game, I'm really worried that the issue's just going to crop up again. And everyone's going to have not everyone, but a lot of people are going to have their save files corrupted. Hopefully that's not the case, but let me know if you think differently in the comments below. But I want to end the video on this. Like, some people have been asking, like, there's so many fixes and bug fixes, and that's all they're doing lately in these updates. Where are the actual gameplay features and new changes coming to the game? Where are city maps? Where are the new ways to travel? Where are all the stuff that you promised us a couple of months ago? Specifically, this is what Bethesda Game Studios said. Quote, "We're also hard at work on many of new features you asked for, from city maps to mod support to all new ways of traveling. Stay tuned. These will be rolling out with a regular cadence of fixes and updates we expect to have roughly every 6 weeks. If something can be done in a smaller hotfix in between, like the asteroid, and obviously now the Form ID issue, and we feel it's safe, we'll get one of those out as well. Safe is the key here. We do take a lot of time to test even the smallest change in a game this large and dynamic." So Bethesda says we're still getting these gameplay features. We're still getting city maps and mod support and new ways of traveling, whatever the hell that means, but we're still getting gameplay features at some stage. The big question, of course, is when. When are we getting these gameplay features? Bethesda has been so focused on bug fixing at the moment that if you think about it, they haven't done much else. We've received improvements to lighting at 73 locations. We of course have FSR 3 now. We've received a couple of features like that, but mostly it's been bug fixes. And some people have been getting a little bit frustrated by that because they probably had relatively bug-free playthroughs of Starfield and they just want the cool new features to actually give them a reason to keep playing, or if they've lapsed, a reason to come back and play the game, right? So I've seen that sentiment, I can understand it to an extent, but I will say that I still think right now bug fixes are much more important. There are still some really big bugs in the game, especially quest blockers or people that literally can't play the game anymore because of those issues. There are still some really big bugs that Bethesda needs to address ASAP, right? People aren't going to care about their fancy new city map or new ways of traveling if they can't bloody play the game, right? If they keep encountering FPS issues, if they keep encountering quest blockers in the game, they're not going to care. That is absolutely more important. However, there will be a point where those big issues are addressed where, yeah, gameplay features would absolutely be a priority at that stage. And ideally, we get both. Ideally, we get 1 or 2 cool new gameplay features in every update, in addition to a slew of bug fixes, right? That's the ideal situation. Is it always going to happen? I doubt it. Maybe next update we get city maps in addition to a bunch of other fixes. I just don't know whether that's actually going to happen. I think we're still going to get all those things this year. Hopefully we get mod support this year. But right now, maybe give it a few months, but right now I still think bug fixes are more important. But anyways, let me know what you think about this latest update in the comments below. And until next time, this has been the Lone Vault Wanderer. Please take care of yourselves and would you kindly keep fighting the good fight.